I, Riley Baxter, am a patient man. Some people confuse patience with wimpiness. I'm not weak. Surely some of you must think I'm of the I don't get mad, I get even variety. Wrong. I'm a revenge hurts more than it hurts kind of guy. Not many people know this because by biding my time, I've been able to exact revenge without harming myself. Most people probably think I'm a wimp, but I warn you, don't do anything that might incur my wrath. My wife, Farah, waited 17 years into our marriage to capitalize on her perception of me as a weakling. As soon as our daughter was old enough to drive, Farah decided she no longer needed to be a homemaker and started working as a personal assistant for her friend from church, Al Baker, who ran the local office of an accounting firm. She seemed to enjoy it and will have more money for retirement. That's assuming she didn't have to buy more clothes suitable for the office than for home. How did I know about her betrayal? First of all, I'm also a suspicious person. My wife has always been very attractive. Decent breasts, great legs, and a better-than-average ass. Men noticed her, but their jaws only dropped, not dropped. Now that she's almost 40, she seeks validation of her attractiveness more openly, usually from other men. I've always had an advantage over other potential cuckolds. I saved Jimmy Reston's life during Desert Storm. Not that I was a hero, but in saving my own skin, I just as easily saved his. Anyway, he said he would always be in my debt. His debt was repaid many times over with all the personal investigator services his firm provided me for free. 5 times in the first 17 years of our marriage, I thought something was wrong, and I asked Jimmy to look into it. 5 times it either turned out not to be true, or Farah or her potential lover changed their minds before things got really serious. The clue to the last suspicion was that she was being nice to me. I know it may seem strange, but you get used to a certain level of niceness on the part of your spouse. A decrease or increase in the level of niceness can be a sign that something not good is going on. As usual, I called Jimmy and told him about her new job, hence the routine. It took less than 10 days to get the photos, the report, and the audio recording. The biggest surprise to me was that Farah's lover turned out not to be her boss, Al. Instead, she had a long lunch once a week with one of the young accountants. They would meet at a local motel known for charging by the hour. It was so familiar to Jimmy's private investigator firm that they had a standard agreement and fee from the motel owner to get evidence on potential adulterers. So what did I do with the information I got? I waited. I'm a patient man. Although we had a daughter staying at home, she was soon to leave for college. Her college fund would not be affected. A divorce would hurt my wife and me financially about equally, and me even more than her. I asked Jimmy to gather as much information as he could about the accountant and his family, especially his wife. After finding out that his wife was a piece of work, I enlisted the help of a neighborhood feminazi who had gone through a nasty divorce. She wasn't interested in talking to me at first, but when she found out she could help tighten the screws on the cheating bastard, she agreed to do it without payment. However, I wasn't surprised when Maggie later changed her mind and took the money. Maggie found out where the accountant's wife went during the day and, by coincidence, kept running into her. They developed a friendship based mostly on banter with their husbands. One topic of discussion was what they would do if they caught an unfaithful husband. Although the affair had stopped in the last few months, I used to send my accountant's wife pictures from the motel. I only sent the ones that didn't show my wife's face. A few days later, the news did a quick story about a man whose wife cut off his dignity with scissors, apparently because of his affair. I noticed that my wife looked particularly upset that day after work. Naturally, I asked what was the matter. Farah said that one of the accountants she worked with had been hospitalized due to an accident and would probably not be able to return to work. She felt very sorry for him and his family. I asked if she was going to visit him in the hospital. Farah quickly shouted, "No!" before realizing how emotional her reaction was. In response, she said, "I didn't know him that well. There was no need to visit him. Why don't we change the subject?" I agreed, but I found it hard not to smile. My wife continued to be amiable for a while longer, and then we went back to the way things were before her cheating. I was still waiting for the right opportunity to get back at her when she started being amiable again. You know the drill: Jimmy, private investigator, stakeout, and report. This time, however, there were no photos or audio recordings. The private investigator was sure she was doing it with her boss, Al, in the office. He just didn't have proof. We coordinated a series of phone calls, me to Farah and the fake clients to Al. By method of elimination, we found out that on Thursday afternoon between 1 and 3 o'clock, both Al and Farah were in a conference call so they wouldn't be disturbed. Close, but still not proof. Finally, we were able to bribe the night janitor to put a tape recorder under the conference room table on Wednesday night and put it away the next night. On Friday, we had the audio proof we needed. You know what I did? I waited. I'm a patient person. When our daughter left for college, I was ready. I guess this is where I have to admit what a hypocrite I am. Part of the reason I could be so patient while my wife slept with another man was because I enjoyed the pleasures of my secretary. When I hired a new secretary, I chose her based on my need for money and my lack of a husband-boyfriend. Sissy was a single mom and desperately needed a job. We quickly agreed on duties not listed in her job description and extra money from the accounting department. We were both pleased. It was agreed that if she found someone to marry, she would return to secretarial work with a normal salary. Now back to Farah and Al. Again, information about his family. Although I knew Al and his wife Mildred socially, I was not privy to their personal history. Mildred was large and rather rough, while Al was small and smooth. I think women would say he was charming. When I found out that Mildred was a college softball star, I had an idea. I invited Mildred to lunch on Cheating Thursday. I told her about her husband's and my wife's cheating. At first, she didn't believe me. I turned on a tape of him talking about what a bitch his wife was and how he enjoyed my wife much more than his own. I drove Mildred into a frenzy and we drove to their office. When we got out of the car, I handed her an aluminum softball bat. Mildred smiled. We walked past the suddenly agitated receptionist and headed into the conference room. The smoked glass of the locked door withstood no more than one swing of the bat. While Mildred unlocked the door, I managed to snap a picture of the partially clothed couple. She started with the husband first. The blow to the top of his head caused him to raise both arms up, which in turn caused him to be exposed in the front. The spiky tip of her high-heeled shoe turned his formerly powerful organ into a would-be useless nozzle. He slumped into a fetal position. Her attention shifted to Farah. Mildred focused on her head. Farah had covered her face, resulting in the destruction of her arms in addition to significant damage to her skull. Somehow, Farah retained consciousness, which was not in her favor. While Farah was conscious, Mildred continued to abuse her. I almost felt sorry for Farah, but finally she passed out. Mildred stopped. I pulled her over to a chair and sat her down. I knew it was only a matter of time before the building security and the city police would be there. Mildred and I were content to wait for them. Suddenly, Mildred jumped up and kicked her husband again. I was about to stop her, but she declared that she had had enough and sat back down. Mildred was charged and convicted of aggravated assault and attempted murder. She was completely calm during the trial and even considered playing the tape as a mitigating factor. She received 10 to 15 years. Mildred adapted well to prison, becoming a gangster for one of the most violent gangs in her prison. She also planned to enjoy the proceeds from her lawsuit against Farah for alienation of affection, her divorce from Al, and her lawsuit against the accounting firm for failing to comply with the non-brotherhood policy. I was charged and convicted of accessory to aggravated assault and attempted murder. A sentence of 5 years in prison was commuted to probation. The tape was a mitigating factor, as it had been in Mildred's case, but the main one was that Farah's injuries were so serious that she would need a caregiver for the rest of her life. Her insurance did not cover nursing home care and only very limited in-home care. Although she appeared to have mental capacity, she was unable to speak, walk, or use her hands. She had to be fed either liquids or pureed food. Her only relatives were myself and our daughter. Our daughter had just gotten married and was pregnant with our first grandchild. She was unable to care for her mother and lived so far away that it was difficult for her to even visit her. I was the only caregiver option, and that was only acceptable as long as Adult Protective Services kept an eye on me. Some people thought I got off easy because of what I did. Some people thought that by having to care for her for years, I had suffered a well-deserved punishment. I was determined to make it easy. In public, I was the dedicated sacrificial wimp I was supposed to be, and I did push the wheelchair a little, lift, carry, wash, wipe, dress, and so on and so forth. But most of the time, I hired caregivers to do all of that. As with the receptionist, I looked for pretty women who needed money. When I thought one of them might be a potential caregiver, I made her sign a non-disclosure agreement. Non-disclosure agreements are not uncommon in the healthcare industry. This agreement stated that I could sue the job applicant if she refused the job because I had asked for special care for me as well. When it came to offering sex on the side, I wasn't so blunt. I would tell the applicant how hard it was for me not to be able to make love to a beautiful woman who now had the abilities of a mannequin. And then I would cry. Crying and a salary well above most similar jobs solved the issue with the women I was hiring. If you think my revenge was now complete, you don't know me well. Sometime later, I told the caregivers that my wife's doctor believed that she could regain some of her abilities if she was shaken in some way. Then I said that my wife was so sure of my fidelity that the shock might be that I was having sex with other women. No, I didn't start having a sitter in front of my wife, but I did the following. I videotaped our sex and showed my wife the DVDs, whispering in her ear that this was part of my revenge on her. The first few times I showed the video, she had tears in her eyes. The last few years have been great. Everyone thinks I'm a saint for taking care of my infirm wife, at least those who don't know about the fact that I set her up to be beaten. I get great sex from 2 or 3 women on a regular basis. I have a lot of money from a lawsuit against Al and Al's accounting firm. Mildred and I exchanged money with him, as well as my own pension and investments. Farah's friends faded as she did not respond to their attempts at socializing, and their enthusiasm waned. They were only allowed to come over at certain times so as not to distract me from my care. The only exception was her friend Glenda. Glenda takes her to church with her and likes to drive her around town in nice weather. She's a little churchy for me, but it gives me a respite that I don't have to pay for. She has now taken Farah to a revival event with renowned faith healer Benny Robertson. Glenda believes in this kind of thing. She is going to keep Farah overnight, which gives me time to write this story. I don't know who will read it, but I had fun writing it. Farah. The cell doors opened with a clang and then closed. Footsteps were the only thing to be heard in the long, sterile hallway. 2 conservatively dressed men, accompanied by a guard, entered the interrogation room. With disheveled hair, they looked as if they had been licked by a huge cat. Before going inside, they peered through the double-sided glass and saw a woman in an orange suit chained to a ring on a table. The first man said, "She doesn't look like a psychopathic killer to me." The guard replied, "Do you want to talk to her or not?" "Sorry, just commenting. Can we talk to her, please?" "Isn't that why you're here? Just don't get too close. I'll be watching from the window if you need help." The men looked at each other as if not realizing the danger. Nevertheless, they approached the table cautiously. "Can we sit down and talk to you?" Farah replied, "I suppose so. At least it will save us from the routine. What do you need?" "Well, we're employees of the Reverend Benny Robertson. We've been told that from Reverend Robertson's touch, you have had a delayed reaction healing of tremendous power. Is that true?" "Yes, so what of it?" "I don't know if you've been following the news, but Reverend Robertson has been heavily criticized lately for falsifying some of the healing claims that occurred during his crusades. We have been gathering evidence of his successes, and we have been told that you may be his most significant healing that can be medically proven. We hope you will agree to cooperate with the research that needs to be done to establish the proof." "And what's in it for me?" "I suppose you know that a born-again Christian was just elected governor of our state. He believes in the spiritual gifts that God says men can possess, such as speaking in tongues and faith healing. We believe he will be inclined to commute your sentence if you help us. If all goes well, you could be free in a few months." Farah stood up quickly. Yes, so abruptly that blood rushed from where the handcuffs clawed at her wrists. "Parole? You idiots think I want parole? You don't know anything about what happened, do you?" One of the men nearly fell to the floor from shock. "I'm sorry if we've upset you. Please sit down. You're right. We really don't know what happened. Could you please tell us so we can understand?" As she lowered herself into the chair, she seemed to notice her bloody wrists for the first time. Noticed, but didn't pay it any mind. She began her story with how she first met Riley Baxter, about their marriage, the affairs and consequences of being married to a patient man. Eventually, she got to the day she was taken in by Benny Robertson's crusade. My friend Gloria took me to the arena. She took me to the wheelchair-accessible section on the floor. It was crowded, and the staff was going around people to decide who would be asked to come on stage for personal healing. At first, the staff passed me by, but Gloria was adamant that I go on stage. After a spirited altercation with the staff, she prevailed, and I ended up in line. When he finally approached me, he was told my story of how I became disabled. He asked everyone to pray with him by touching my head. I felt a surge of electrical energy enter my body. I knew immediately that I was healed. But at that moment, you didn't react in any way to the fact that something had happened? Who's telling the fucking story, you or me? I'm sorry. Please continue. Benny knew something was wrong. He predicted that my healing had happened, but it would take a few days for the full effect. He tried very hard to get contact information on me and Gloria so that his staff could follow up. Truth be told, I had been thinking for years about what I would do if by some miracle I could recover. Even though part of my brain said it was a futile endeavor, it was the only thing I lived for. When I found out I was going to Benny's, I already had a plan in place in case I was healed. When I felt healed, I didn't move. Believe me, it was very hard not to jump out of my wheelchair and scream to the heavens, but I didn't. It was part of my plan. That night, I stayed with Gloria. After she went to bed, I began to see what had been healed. My muscles had atrophied, but I could walk with some difficulty, could move my arms and, to a lesser extent, my hands. I could speak in a whisper. I felt fine, except for the fact that I had fooled my friend Gloria. She was shocked that I wasn't healed. Back home, I continued to feign helplessness. When Riley was out of sight, I got some sleeping pills. Later, after he'd had a few, he needed to urinate. This was my opportunity to slip the pills into his drink. After an hour or so, he passed out completely. I went to work. I felt euphoric. I took off his pants and underwear. I took a catheter and inserted it into his dignity. Then I took the superglue and applied it to the catheter until it went all the way in. Slowly, I pulled the catheter out, continuing to sprinkle as I progressed. When his urethra was filled with superglue, I went into the bedroom to the drawer of toys that Riley used with some of his girlfriends. I found a butt plug. Coating the end and sides with superglue, I quickly inserted it into his, then sealed the end. Have you ever heard the old joke about body parts arguing that each is more important than the other? The eyes made their arguments, then the mouth, then the ears, and so on, until the anus claimed to be the most important. To prove their point, each body part stopped functioning. After a few days, they all gave up and admitted that the asshole was the most important. After a few days of Riley not being able to pee or poop, I understood the joke much better. "Oh," he begged me wordlessly, "the caregivers will come and find me." It was easy. I just put a note on the door that he was sick with something contagious, but he could still take care of me. He would call when he needed them again. Then he said that the Bible says that the best way to deal with enemies is to be kind to them by pouring coals on their head. I liked the idea of using real coals, but it was too messy. He went on to say that he loves me so much that the thought of me having another man just drives him crazy. Can't I give him another chance? "Bullshit," was all I said. For the next few days, I ignored his rants, which amounted to how much he loved me and threats about what he would do when he got free. His physical condition deteriorated rapidly, as the toxins that would normally be excreted outside remained and festered inside. When he started vomiting his own feces, I took that as a signal that it was time for me to run. I exercised and was confident that I could now drive. The next morning, I managed to withdraw a substantial amount of money and drove north about 500 miles. At this time, I called the police to find that there had been a disturbance at the house where I used to live. I told them that I was a concerned neighbor and did not want to identify myself. After the call, I headed west and drove until I no longer wanted to go. I found a country town and rented an apartment that used to be a motel room. The town had a few good restaurants and pretty good internet. What more could I want? The answer: brains. I didn't realize that Riley had installed a computer chip in my car by which it could be easily detected. I later learned that he had lived and told the police about the locator chip. I was soon extradited back to stand trial for attempted murder. The worst part was watching the smirk on Riley's face in the courtroom. At least I enjoyed it when his colotomy bag ripped open and made a mess of the courtroom. He'll think of me every time he has to excrete waste products because it will have to be done in ways he never imagined before. Farah sighed. She was ready to finish her story. Now, do you see why I don't want to go out? The two young men looked at each other. Both had questioning looks. Maybe I'm a little slow. Could you please explain in more detail? He's alive, you idiot. He thinks of ways to get back at me every day. I'm in the safest place to avoid his revenge. Even here, I'm constantly on guard. He has the cunning to get me here. There's a reason I'm a stiff donkey here. I find myself in a burrow, which is the safest place on Earth. The only reason I'm still alive is because I get the satisfaction of knowing that he knows I'm alive and hasn't gotten to me. Interrogation over! Guards! After the results of their visit were presented to Reverend Robertson, their asses were chewed off to the fullest. They were ordered to go to Riley Baxter and see if there was any way or amount of money that would make him promise not to hurt Farah and keep her out of jail. With their tails tucked, the young men set off for the Baxter house. Riley. Well, I'll end this story. Even though that bitch was very close to the ultimate revenge, I have to give her credit for that. That's going to be hard to top. Anyway, I got a visit from those two religious robots from that sorcerer guy who supposedly faith-healed Farah. By the way, I think my shocking sex tapes were the reason for her recovery. Anyway, these two tried to get me to promise not to harm Farah if she was released. Of course, I thought about lying, but Farah wouldn't buy it. I know she has 7 more years left to serve. I can wait. I'm a patient man.